Hi, this is Celeste with the Celestial Report, and I am so happy to have you here today. I'm going to have a very interesting discussion with Jesse Beltran, and he reached out to me, and I think that you'll find it very interesting. So, welcome, Jesse.
Thank you. Pleasure being on your show.
Yeah. So, tell us a little bit about who Jesse is.
Okay. Well, I'm a retired firefighter paramedic out of the city of Sacramento. Formerly, I was the president of an organization called the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies. I am currently the president of Cosmic Clarity Connections, who holds the Mind Nexus live event, an event that brings a bunch of expert speakers together to disseminate uh, studies, truth, data that maybe not be in the mainstream media, so that we can engage the general population. I was also part owner of the third largest internet service provider in the state of California. And the reason I bring that up is before high-speed data was around, we were instrumental in creating line of sight high-speed data via microwave technology. And that the reason I say that is because that is going to be in part some of the things we're talking about today.
So, I'm curious about what year was that, or years?
Um, you're going to be during that time. It would have been in the mid to late 90s when I
Yeah,
was
so
part
that's
owner.
about, so I was working with FEMA, and of course, it was before Department of Homeland Security, and they approached us. Well, the one, there was a war, which you're probably aware of, with all the ham operators and the repeaters between emergency management and the ham operators. Until then, ham operators were very vital for any disaster situation, but things started to change. And then what happened is they decided, they sold the public and the Congress and the FCC and everybody on Doppler radar. And they said, oh, the benefits of Doppler radar is you're going to be able to see the raindrop coming to you all the way from Asia, and you're going to know exactly what to prepare for. But what they didn't say is that those Doppler radars were really microwave towers. So all the Doppler radar was a microwave. And I wasn't in favor of that technology at all, but it was barreling at us, as you well know.
Yes, definitely is, and it's on steroids now.
Yes, absolutely. Things that we couldn't have even dreamed of. So, so in your time, the second thing that you mentioned about covert technologies, so do you reach out and help people that are targeted individuals?
Well, in part, I would yes. There's a large majority of individuals who I have engaged with over the last 20 years. The reason we started the International Center against the Abuse of Covert Technologies is after I met a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Hall. He was the author of a couple of books. First one was Satellite Terrorism in America, and the second one was Guinea Pigs Technologies of Control. He and also another gentleman who recently passed, I think you may know, Dr. Duncan, who was the author of Soul Catchers. And so we're sort of a circle of influence at the time. The reason I came into the picture is I was in a conference in Texas where I met Dr. Hall, and he got on the topic of individuals claiming of symptoms, saying they're hearing sudden onset of acute sounds, followed by headaches, migraines, electrical shocks to the extremities, um, vertigo. And at the time, there wasn't a name for it. And the reason the topic came up is because he said whenever these individuals went to their general practitioners, they were always diagnosed with some type of. And unfortunately, that just was the times back then. And it just basically re-victimized these people who were really, truly victims, going through what we now know the term as Havana Syndrome. And I use the term domestic Havana Syndrome because that is truly what it is. Late 2009, 2010, I wanted to create an organization so that we can obtain more data so we can take it from these subjective and make it more objective so that we can measure results regardless of what the data was telling us. So in our first meeting was held in Sacramento, California, and I didn't expect many people to show up, but over 100 people showed up, and they all had the exact same complaints with very, very little deviation in that. So the second time meeting we held in Davis, California, and 300 people showed up to that event.
Wow.
And the reason they showed up is because we advertised that we were going to be doing radio frequency scanning. And I forgot to mention, Dr. Hall was also doing that on a limited basis with these individuals. And the reason we're using frequency scanners is because they all felt, including the 100 that I first met, that they were receiving some type of signal. And so we wanted to delve into that a little bit deeper. And what we were finding is that people were coming up positive at very focal locations around their person for a positive RF emission. And we were using what is called a JM20 Pro. It's a general frequency detector. And you can calibrate it to where you have to be within a couple of inches of the emission. And what we were seeing in the results initially is that the majority of victims were Caucasian females, highly educated, recently single, widowed, or divorced. Then it was Caucasian males, then African-American females, African-American males, Asian females, and Asian males, and it dwindled down in ethnicity from there. So we felt that we were onto something. And so we continued advertising that we would be doing these RF scans. So we did it in the Midwest, exact same results until we got into Chicago area, and it flipped a little bit in ethnicities where African Americans became the primary complainants, and then it was Caucasians, Asians, and it dwindled down from there. And it remained that way all the way to the East Coast, except for one anomaly, which was up in Virginia, where I was invited by a group of folks, which were all military subcontractors. And I found that fascinating.
Yes.
But prior to that, I forgot to mention in the introduction is that I am a certified master hypnotist with a diploma in hypnotherapy. And the reason I did that was because I started to see a phenomena. The people who were most affected by this, and when I say most affected, they weren't able to continue their careers. They lost everything. They became homeless. And these were some very highly educated people, doctors, lawyers, attorneys, politicians, and then white collar workers, blue collar workers. So we've seen the gamut. But anyway, in Virginia, I decided to start testing for suggestibility. And so I asked the group, I go, if I were to ask you, anyone in here, are you highly suggestible? Raise your hand. And no one did. And then I asked if you thought you were not suggestible. Almost everyone raised their hand. So I picked the most intimidating person in the room. He was about 6'6", very good, fit looking gentleman, African American. And he came in and I just said, let's have a chat. And we're talking just like you and I are speaking now. And before you know it, I go, do me a favor. Can you please try to pull your hands apart? And he couldn't. And what I was doing is covertly embedding suggestions in the language while we were talking. And we tried with all his might, started to become puzzled. A little anxiety started to develop, which is not what I want. But everyone else in the room was in awe, saying, what did you do to him? And because I don't want an ab-reaction could lead to some negative implications, I just go sleep. And then I just said, now that you know that you may be highly suggestible, that's the first defense in defending yourself. And did some positive affirmations, and then woke him back up and asked him the same question. I said, so if I asked you if you were highly suggestible, what would you say? And he says, well, I would have to say yes now that I experienced that. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because there were a couple of events that happened in the United States in our history. And it's unfortunate. There was a gentleman by the name of Aaron Alexis. And Aaron Alexis was a military person who called me one day and started complaining about these the same phenomena. Now, these symptoms that these people are having are the exact same symptoms that Colonel Greg Egren just gave testimony in Congress at the Department of Homeland Security hearing on March 8th of this year. And in that, he described what they were calling the Havana Syndrome. And the Havana Syndrome is a syndrome that our U.S. diplomats were experiencing in Havana, Cuba, they say in 2016, but it actually started in 2014. And what he described the symptoms as is this acute onset of this strange sound. Headaches, nausea, vomiting, vertigo, electrical shocks to the extremities. Sound familiar? So it's exactly the same symptoms that these victims that we have been covering domestically since 2010 and documenting it. Now, what does this mean? Colonel Egren says that they believe it's some type of directed energy weapon. Someone's pointing a weapon at these individuals or the building or whatever, and that's why they're having these symptoms. And so I wanted to use a common sense approach because I knew we already knew what was happening. But for whatever reason, at that hearing at the Department of Homeland Security, when they were asked by representatives from Congress, is this happening to civilians? They skirted the issue. And they said, no, they can't attest to anything about civilians because they only look at federal employees. And all three of the witnesses all claimed the same thing, except they did say that some of the family members of these diplomats were experiencing the same thing. Well, a lot of those family members are civilians. And what this meant then is that they did not want to admit that this is happening to our civilian population. They were there in testimony. Really, their agenda was to get the VA to get a code so that these federal employees can go to the VA and get treatment for Havana Syndrome. And so where we are today is what we figured out is that if this signal is being aimed, the logistical nightmare of hiring people to follow these individuals around would just not be cost effective. It doesn't make sense. So then our theory was there's got to be something unique about each of these individuals that allows them to receive the signal. And so I'm going to share my screen here in just a second for you. And I'm going to show you what we discovered. This is one of my earliest clients that we had scanned. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is a report, pathology report, and removed 3 specimens from this woman. And this woman has been suffering with this phenomenon for about 20 years. And if you look closely, what they're checking for is they're checking for possible biosensors or nano sensors. And what they found is that's exactly what was pulled out of her. And they're now nano size. And I'll show your viewers what they look like today. So this is what's being pulled out. These are actually nano wires, nano antennas. Our bodies don't reject them, and they will just engulf them. And she had 3 different types pulled out of her. And this is not the only case. And so the reason I bring this up is because when I said they have to have a mechanism to receive that signal, we strongly believe that this is the mechanism. Now, it seems kind of far-fetched in science fiction, but I'm going to show an intercepted document, an internal document that was released in a recent lawsuit that was filed against the Department of Corrections. And the name is the DeVore case. And Dawn DeVore was a nurse who worked for the Department of Corrections. And she sued after becoming a whistleblower and was put into this program. And what was interesting about this case, her Exhibit 2, was this internal document that was intercepted. And it's from the IntelliConnection, a security division of IBM. It says confidential, limited distribution, only level 9 communication, which means only top level people were supposed to have this document. And it says 2020 neural chip implant. And it says the control of crime will be a paramount concern in the 21st century. We must be ready with our security products when the demand for them becomes popular. Our research and development division has been in contact with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the California Department of Corrections, the Texas Department of Public Safety, and the Massachusetts Department of Corrections to run limited trials of the 2020 neural chip implant. We have established representatives of our interest in both management and institutional levels within these departments. So they were getting their people hired for these organizations. And it says federal regulations do not yet permit testing of implants on prisoners, but we have entered into contractual agreements with privatized healthcare professionals and specified correctional personnel to do limited testing on our product. We have also had major success in privately owned sanitariums with implant technology. We need, however, to expand our testing to research how effective the 2020 neural chip implant performs in those identified as the most aggressive in our society. Limited testing has produced a number of results. In California, several prisoners were identified as members of a security threat group. So, they always use the auspices, this is done for our safety. They were brought to the health services at Pelican Bay and tranquilized with advanced sedatives developed by our Cambridge, Massachusetts laboratories. The implant procedure takes 60 to 90 minutes depending upon the experience of the technician. We are working on a device which will reduce the time by as much as 60%. The results of the implants on 8 prisoners yielded the following results. Implants served as surveillance monitoring devices for the threat group. Interesting about that, not only was it able to track their whereabouts, but it's able to transmit and receive data within their environment. So everything that's going on around them, they can hear. Implants disabled 2 subjects during an assault on correctional staff. So they can disable people. Universal side effects in all 8 test subjects revealed that when an implant was set at 160 megahertz, all subjects became lethargic and slept on an average of 18 to 22 hours a day. All subjects refused recreational periods for 14 days straight, with the 160 megahertz being transmitted to them. And that's obvious. If you're going to make them where they're just going to sleep, they're not going to want to exercise, which they talk about 7 of the 8 subjects did not want to exercise. Each subject was monitored for aggressive activity during the test period, and the findings are conclusive that out of the 8 test subjects exhibited no aggression even when provoked. Each subject experienced only minor bleeding from the nose and ears for 48 hours. And these next paragraphs tell you how conniving they were. Each subject experienced only minor bleeding, I just read. Each subject had no knowledge of the implant for the test period, and each implant was retrieved under the guise of medical treatment. It should be noted that the test period was for less than 2 months. However, during the period substantial data gathering, our research and development team, which suggests that the implant exceeded expected results. One of the major concerns of security and the research and development team was that the test subject would discover the chemical imbalance during the initial adjustment period, and the test would have to be scrubbed. However, due to the advanced technological developments in sedatives administered, the 48-hour adjustment period can be attributed to the prescription medication given to the test subjects after the implant procedure. One of the concerns raised by R&D was the cause of the bleeding and how to eliminate that problem. Unexplained bleeding might cause subject to inquire further about what was done to them. And the security windfall from the brief test period was enormous. Security officials now know several strategies employed. The the facility transmission of illegal drugs. Basically, they're saying they now know how to spy on people. But this is a pretty damning document. And I can, yeah, go ahead.
No, it is a damning document. I agree.
Okay. So I can also attest that I've had meetings with high-level people in the Department of Corrections, and them not knowing what I was working on, I would just inquire, and I said, "Hey, I hear Governor Reagan was talking about implanting all of our prisoners," and I was already aware that white papers were being done in the United States, and I said, "Is something like that true?" And they confided in me, say, "Yes, it is being done, but if anyone asked me if I talked to you about it, we would deny it." So what does this mean? When we did the RF scans, mostly people who were suffering from the Havana Syndrome would come to me. And those, we can superimpose their scans over each other. And those focal areas that they came up positive were all identical. Then there was a subgroup. Those in the military, you can align them over each other. They were slightly different, but those were all identical. And what I didn't understand is why the prisoners, people who were incarcerated, who came to see me, I can superimpose them. And they were also lining up, but slightly different. This document is exactly why. I already knew, even though this is a later study, I already was aware back in 2008, 2009, 2010, that they were already in full-fledged doing this study. So what does this mean? This is debilitating. If you listen to Colonel Egren, those who are being afflicted in our federal government are the best of our best. They're the elite of our elite. So the smartest minds in our U.S. embassies, the smartest minds in our CIA, the smartest minds in our FBI. And we are now having some political figures who are affected by this here in the United States.
Yes.
This has taken me all the way to Europe. I've had government agencies invite me over to test their diplomats. And I had an opportunity they asked me to bring individuals who I felt might be subjected to this, who came up positive in our preliminary RF scans. And I was taken to a remote location and I had to sign an NDA, but they allowed me to use what's called an anechoic chamber. And an anechoic chamber is basically a big environment that blocks out these huge frequency spectrums from entering that environment. And why is that important? Because if we believe these persons were emitting a frequency of some sort, then we want to make sure that we have some type of control for that environment to test them in there to see if there is an emission. Because we already knew what the frequency range was, and we knew this anechoic chamber definitely would block that out. So we use controls, we use people who were not victims, and we test them in the environment, and our frequency reader would read 0. But when we put the frequency reader on those who came up positive at those focal areas, it would pick up a signal, only in those focal areas. And this is when we knew that we probably were dealing with some type of technology or an implant situation. It took a while, but we're finally there. We do have cases currently where we're removing these implants. And this is why we're now, because if it wasn't for the advent of Homeland Security having that hearing, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion right now. Because what happens is most people are labeled as some type of tinfoil hat, having a mental disorder. And these are people who are being wrongly diagnosed with schizophrenia. And it's completely destroying their lives. I've had physicians who had $1 million practices who were afflicted by this, and they didn't heed our advice, and they went to traditional medicine, and they were labeled with a mental disorder, and they weren't allowed to touch patients anymore, so they lose everything. We have stories like this over and over and over again in the hundreds, and I believe I have people contacting me from all over the planet. And Colonel Egren testified that this is a global phenomenon that is happening right now, and it is happening on every continent with one exception, and that's Antarctica. Okay.
Yeah, so my knowledge of this is maybe you're aware of the backstory. I don't know if you follow my work or not, but so in 1971 at Asilomar 1, they decided to genetically modify all life on Earth. That's 1975. On Halloween 2005, from the United Nations to all the signatory countries, including our own federal government, there was a mandate called the National Animal Identification System. And yes, they do believe we're animals, and I can go into all the documentation on that. But it's now known as traceability, and it's mandatory. It has 3 pillars. 1, that all property, including your body, belongs to the government. 2, the electronic identification of all life. That's every human, every animal, every plant, every microbe, and every bacteria. And we're seeing that right now playing out before our eyes. The property and the electronic identification, it uses an alphanumeric code, kind of like an IP address, and with a country code and an asset code to that country, so that when global governance comes in, if God forbid you don't give them the global government, they're just due, the assets of that country can be confiscated. It also, when they made that a Asilomar conference and we rolled into 2005, and I was working at both the federal level and the state level, working against this system while working for the government. We worked with attorneys and found out that when they made the decision to genetically modify people, that meant that they are not original design. So they were patentable. So basically, they could do anything they wanted with you once you were altered in any way genetically. And then the government holds the first position on the title for the patent. So then the third pillar of that was 24/7 surveillance. Now, each one of these had track and trace ability, identification, as I mentioned, this unique alphanumeric code, which is now people are seeing it as an IP address because of the technology changed. The little things that you showed are a redundant system. So like that old RFID chip that was common around 2000 that Catherine Albrecht was talking about. I was very active working with Catherine Albrecht on that. And it is a redundant system. They found that what they would do is just because you injected it in one location, it would travel throughout the body, and they were very cancer causing. Not that they worried about that too much, but it was a concern. So they went to synthetic biology, which is where we're at today. And 2 years ago, I did a webinar in synthetic biology. So it's these synthetic nanobots that are
self-replicating,
self-assembling, self-replicating, have graphene, hydrogel pretty much take over your body. And really, for all intent purposes, they are the surveillance system. Like you said, it's going to be what they are determining our social credit, our currency, and all of that through compliance. And I'm actually doing a webinar right now, a series called The Color of Evil, talking about this technology and the colorful, like quantum dots, and how hydrogel fits into it at a deeper level as we enter some really dark times. And I just have to share my experience just because you're a researcher. So you're going to want to hear. So about the same time as this report that you had, So my husband was killed in 2016, and
Sorry to hear that.
yeah, it was. Whistleblowers pay a high price. That's all I can say. And
Yes.
so afterwards, my doctor sees the opportunity. I have one medication and it's for seizures. And I believe I got the seizures as a result of when I got the seizures, I was living about 30 miles from ELF, extra low frequency for communicating with the submarines. And that's because I came out of the blue and I had no trauma. I was on my way home from work and all of a sudden I get seizures and no bumps on the head, no illness, no nothing. So anyway, I've been on seizure medicine for 25 years or whatever, however long it was. And so after David was killed, they had me sign this contract that you have to go in and get your blood checked and your urine to make sure you're not abusing the substance, which was so nuts because I'd been on it, same dose, blah, 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 And they called me, it was August, and I had 100 pounds of cherries, and I picked those cherries one cherry at a time, and then I count them. And I don't have a huge refrigeration. I'm like a single woman here. And they said, you got to come right now. Well, that's like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And so I told them no. The next day, I received a certified letter from them. They were just waiting because I was doing what I do now. I'm a whistleblower and a journalist. Okay. And so the next day I get this certified letter stating you're an addict, you're an addict, you're an addict, 2 pages of you're an addict. And at the end it said, you have 90 days to submit yourself to get a brain implant. And I told them I was livid because I went down to that physician's office and I said, I have been waiting for this for decades. And I said, heck with you. And they said, you will get no medical. And thank God I learned natural medicine because they
God
held
bless
good.
Your soul.
They held to their thing. They said, we're not going to give you anything. No matter if you have a heart attack, we're not treating you, nothing, unless you get that brain implant within 90 days. And
what year was that?
So that was 2017, August 2017. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have just answered a lot of questions that I've had. You hear this thing called the rule of law, and most Americans believe, well, I've got the Bill of Rights and I've got this Constitution, but they have no idea about this phenomenon called the rule of law. And I've always asked, can I please see the book? But it's very difficult to obtain. And I know that the Presidential Bioethics Commission had a couple of hearings. The one was in 2011, which 300 American victims showed to, and Dr. Hall was one who testified at that hearing. That was put together by President Obama. Amy Gutman was the chair, who is now our ambassador in Germany for the UN. But they were all told that it was a psychological phenomenon and that it's hysteria and just live with it. I was invited to another Bioethics Commission meeting in San Francisco, the University of San Francisco Hospital there. And Amy Gutman was there, and I've always wondered why the military was there. But we were allowed to ask questions, and they were talking about experimentation and documenting all life forms on this planet.
Yes.
And she said this in front of everyone, that they are the elite 1% of the elite 1% who should be making all decisions about our medical treatments and anything that we do to our bodies. And their agenda was to, ID every living organism, just as you had just described. And I was allowed to ask a question. I had my assistant there, and she wrote it down because they were talking about all this experimentation. And so this CBS, all the major networks were there, and it was all live on film. And when it came to my question, once they read it, It was torn up. And my question was this, and it says, I understand the importance of your experimentation, but what safeguards are you putting aside for the victims when your experimentation goes wrong? And what you just described is not surprising to me, but it does answer a lot of questions. And I don't know if people probably know back in history, which company created the punch card system for the concentration camps? IBM.
IBM, yeah.
And you saw that document, that leaked document. Who was doing this again? It's IBM.
Yes.
So this is why I do what I do. I've been doing this for 20 years now. These victims, there are no resources for them.
Yes.
Zero resources. And it's important that everyone sees the big picture here. How many of our veterans, how many of our homeless have been put in their situations because they're in this program? I have a high suspicion that there is a lot.
Yes.
That is the one subgroup that I have not had the opportunity to do our RF scanning and put them through our process. And our process is very simple. You do a preliminary RF scan. If you come up positive, back then you could probably get an X-ray or an MRI and maybe something would show up, but not always. But when I was in Virginia, I met with a couple of people who worked in the Pentagon, and they wanted to know what I was doing, but I knew they knew what I was doing. And I just mentioned briefly about the implant, and they said, oh, well, we can tell you exactly what year they would put in someone just by the design of the implant. But he described it just like you did. They were much larger back then, and then as the years went on, they became smaller and smaller. As I just demonstrated to you, those are nano-size implants removed from my client, and now they're even smaller than that with this graphene technology, the nanotechnology. And I've got reports now that I've been studying and researching that this graphene nanotech, they're talking about they can organize it remotely in whatever format they want. It will attach to your DNA, and they're talking about changing your species within 6 generations. And so that would make sense now when you say they were wanting to patent, because that was my concern when I was at the Bioethics Commission. I said, are you hearing what they're saying? If they obtain DNA information on every species on their planet, including us humans, they're trying to patent us. And then what happens if you have a positive mutation that cures something or gives you a special ability? That's not yours. It belongs to our government. Yes. And that's where we're at. It's crazy.
Are you aware of the Philo Code?
No, I'm not.
So 2008, I believe, around there. So there was the old classification of life, and it was the linear system of life. A dog is a dog, a cat is a cat, a person is a person. So in about 2008, for 10 years, they knew that they were going to be genetically modifying all species on Earth. And they wanted to add room for biohybrids, synths, robotic humanoids, with biological
biotech, biological
skin, but they're actually robotic, extraterrestrial, interdimensional beings. They knew we were entering this time period, and they wanted to prepare the classification of life chart for that. And so they worked on this. Philo is PHYLOCODE. They worked on it for 10 years. It was codified the beginning of 2019. And what happened at the end of 2019? It was the first release of a biological construct It was a construct. It was constructed out like building blocks, like Legos with a payload in the middle of it, out of many different animals, many different pathogens, things that we didn't understand at the time. And it was SARS-CoV-19. That was the first demonstration or the first release of this phyllo code. So now it was codified in 2019 for all these different species. You talk to any of the, well, I follow the global governance, as a matter of fact, right now, between last month and, well, this whole year actually, and culminating to the fall equinox, we're going to see incredible changes in the world. The UN is poised to seize control of the world, with all the sovereign nations submitting to them on the fall equinox, including a new rule of law, a new human rights charter. There's it, the cyber, they're going to release the cyber currency and their new currency and all of this, all before the 24th of next month. So it's coming to a head. Are you familiar with the work that I did? Oh, so you mentioned Dr. Robert Duncan. Both of us wrote this. I was unaware of his work when I did my soul catcher. Are you aware of the soul catcher that I did?
I heard that you and Robert had did something similar but different.
Yeah. So what I found, I got to get my train of thought here back. So mine was technology and what happened. It was between Soulcatcher and Whack-A-Brain. So I went into the Havana Syndrome. So did you follow the people from Havana, what happened to them afterwards, and the diagnostics?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
So they have these optical things, like if you went to the eye doctor, and so they are very precise. So they can parse out now, are you the victim of a traumatic injury like football accident or car accident? Are you a targeted individual? Because those individuals are constantly being tortured and zapped, if you will. A direct energy weapon person, of which I've had 5 at this point, and I've got certain evidence on that of what it did. But I don't consider myself a targeted, because it's always retribution for something that I did, that I made public, that they didn't like.
You would fall under the whistleblower category.
The whistleblower,
yeah, that's exactly what you would. No, what you're saying is exactly true. And, and I don't share this much because it seems so out there in science fiction that I want to make sure that I maintain the attention of the general population, because the best defense against this is knowledge, being aware. But there's a New World Vistas document that was released in 1994 by the United States Air Force. And in that, they talk about biological processes. And those biological processes, they talk about being able to send memories, send false memories, and program you. And this is happening. And basically, if you know the work of Ewan Cameron, where psychic driving was in its infancy, where they would put people to sleep for long periods of time. He was funded to try to erase their memories and imprint new memories in them. And he would put a helmet on them and play tape recorders of themes over and over again using the law of repetition, which is what you use in hypnosis. And now with these victims, including our best of our best, our diplomats, what do they complain about? Hearing this sound 24/7. So imagine now they have access to millions of people, and they're able to do this psychic driving on steroids. That's only a small part of it. They can create hallucinations. They can get someone who's highly suggestible and cause them to do something and not remember it. And that's where we're at. This is the sci-fi stuff about this. This is so hard to believe for people, But if you do the research, it's there. And I can tell you that because of my exposure to so many victims, not only here in the United States, but throughout Europe, that we're in the midst of it. And you've brought full circle for me a lot of questions that I've had. And here's what's scary. You just mentioned about the UN. I came across an unusual case recently, and he was a retired special forces person. And we do, along with the RF scanning, you get toxicology reports, but after all those come up positive, then we say, well, let's do the nonlinear junction scan. We can do that beforehand. But we did a nonlinear junction scan on this gentleman. And he was a special forces person out of McNeil Air Force Base in Florida. And we detected an unusual frequency, a frequency that we've never detected in 20 years, emitting from this person. And when we tracked down who owns this frequency, NATO. And I'm like, for God's sakes, why does NATO own that lease on that frequency band for our special forces soldier? And if what you're saying is going to happen, that would make complete sense. And that should be concerning to everyone watching.
Yeah, and the Rockefellers are involved. They were the ones that really were starting to, it's eyeball and cobalt. They were the ones classifying all life and then genetically altering it. So and the whole genome project was not about discovering the wonders of the genome and for the sake of humanity and healing the sick. And it was about exploitation and altering it to destroy it. Because so there's a movie. So the other night, there's just not that much to watch, but sometimes you just want to veg. You get tired of it, and you just want to veg. And so I go, oh, like Amazon Prime had this movie, and it was called something No Humans, The Day of No Humans or something. And I go, well, I just want to see, because I'm always thinking, even if I'm resting, I'm thinking. And so I go, I just want to see what the propaganda is. And right off like you think typically a movie starts out slow and then it kind of builds into the storyline. It opens up and it goes day 1 without humans. And then day 2 without humans. And they started with the church and with faith. And they really made a mockery in that first episode that here where all the people of faith are gone. All the buildings of faith are going into the dust. And all of the sacred vessels that different religions have are just vanishing and being taken over by the jungle or whatever, the birds and whatever. And I mean, it was like, it made no bones about it. They want not one human alive. And as for everybody, this is a question people ask me all the time. Well, how are they going to live? Or their children? Because they hate carbon life forms so much. They really truly believe that they can upload themselves into these humanoids, silicon humanoids, and retain all their consciousness and all of this. And then they will be carbon or net free. And they won't be desecrating the planet. They won't interact. One of the things that these nanobots do that I've discovered like this year is that they are literally doing a checkpoint system. Let me get my bottle of essential oil. So think of this as your protein. They're doing a checkpoint system on either side of every protein in your body with this graphene and hydrogel. And it is altering your body so that you can neither take anything from the natural environment or give anything. And you will find as you go along, you will need less air, less food, less water, because you're literally being sealed up as a living organism. Because according to the United Nations, oxygen, CO2, and nitrogen are pollutants. and we can take nothing from nature. So the only synthetic life forms will be allowed on this planet, so that it's not
Wow.
desecrated. So it's pretty wild.
Yeah, that is wild. Well, it makes me think that, we have cases that are making their way through the court system, and usually these cases get presented as a human rights violation issue, and it always gets thrown out of the court. So I'm not going to disclose what the modality is now, but we've been able to move it up. Um, it I'll be interested to see where it goes, because we totally took a different approach. But what you're saying and disclosing to me, and I'm really interested, and I'm really going to dig into your work. My OCD is going to take over, and yeah, but it's disheartening. It
Yeah.
really is disheartening. And so what do we do? What does society do? The only thing we can do is wake up. We have to remember we have our numbers, and as long as we stick together, we have a fighting chance. But we need to have a serious discussion with everyone about, what are our strategies? How can we prevent what's happening is happening? Because there's some organizations out there already, because we're in the midst of it, that believe there's nothing that we can do to stop it, and that should be awakening in itself.
I think that on a personal level, we can each have faith and raise our frequency and fight back on an individual level.
Yeah.
I think fear and submitting, yes, you may feel pain. Yes, you may hear the sounds. And yes, it may be agonizing. If it's a directed energy weapon, you can walk out, ground yourself or walk out of the room or use copper. But inside yourself, inside each one of us, I believe that we are very resilient, and we have it within us to fight back on an individual level. Do I think that there's going to be this mass protest in the street against this technology? No. I don't think it would work, but because each one of our biofields is unique. And so the way that I fight it in the energy, that I say, no, you're not going to affect me, and overcome, is going to be different than the way that you do it, because
Right.
we're all unique individuals.
Yeah.
So have you done any work on the wireless body network?
Yes. And basically what we're just miniature nodes, miniature networks, is what they're creating. Now, you mentioned directed energy weapons. I don't think we're dealing with that. And the reason I say that is I've taken individuals miles down into granite surfaces, and we still receive the signal. So although, and remember my background, I that's what I did. Not in that way. My way was only to send data that we use for the internet at high speeds. But I would take them miles down, and we would still get the frequency readings. So I'd be in areas where there's no cell towers, no cell transmission. You don't get a cell signal for miles. So the logical explanation is so what signals are we receiving? The only signal that we could detect is a satellite signal. So we do know there's an integration of the whole network is integrated together between the satellites and our ground towers and so forth. So, and if you're aware, you can be in the middle of a jungle and still use a satellite phone, but you can't use your cell phone. So that would be one of the explanations on how and why you can't escape the signal. So, that's where we're at.
So that's another thing that I discovered. So last year I did a series. Well, I did it first on acoustical when I was doing the details of the findings or proceedings from the Havana Syndrome. And then I went to optical, and it was about the time of the Lahaina fire. And it just so happens in 2019, I was in the same location, and I got caught in a wildfire over there, but I wasn't looking at optical direct energy weapons at that time. And I actually have a picture
Of
from
the laser coming down.
from the space station down to the base station. They have to have a base station, which that can be inside you, that base station, but they have to have it because in case there's cloud cover or interference or whatever, they have to have lock onto something, like in the old-fashioned science fiction. The tractor has to lock onto something. That's what these optical direct energy weapons have to do. They have to be, otherwise they can't do it. But it was intentional.
Yeah.
Because a base station is there.
Yeah, there were a lot of claims that people were witnessing this white light hitting the ground, and then next thing you know, you had these fires burning at temperatures that just didn't make sense. My daughter lives lives on one of the Hawaiian islands, and they were actually out on a boat when that fire started, and they had some issues, and so they went into port there, and then the fire just was rampant, and the winds were picking up. They were trying to escape the storm coming in, and they had to leave and go into the storm, but they saw these people jumping into the ocean and trying to flee the fires. But and after the fires, my daughter wanted to. They had these huge catamarans, so they wanted to take supplies to the island, and they were turned back by the military. And it didn't make sense. Look, we're trying to feed these people, help them, give them resources, and they weren't allowed to. And there were a lot of reports that there were hundreds of bodies being held in these warehouses that were never disclosed to people. So, it wouldn't be too far-fetched. And I totally believe what you're saying. Yeah.
There is... I was in a Homeland Security meeting after the Indonesian tsunami, and it was the decision was made to identify the living and the dead. And if you did not have identification on you, you're not included in the body count. And so I went to visit a nurse practitioner down in the panhandle of Florida, and a class 5, she lives right near a military base in the panhandle there. I don't know the name of the base, but a class 5 hurricane came in, and she said that they stacked up the bodies like cordwood, and they were never, ever reported because they didn't have identification on them. So they were just mass graves and just not mentioned at all.
Yeah. Well, as a Debbie Downer as this stuff would sound, I think that everyone who was suffering from this needs to be, like you said, be in touch with your internal self, your internal energy, your internal spirit. Nothing on this planet can change that. And it's important to be aware and be educated. That's your first line of defense. This is why we're doing the Mind Nexus event. We have a plethora of experts there, physicians of different backgrounds and speakers of different backgrounds. It's our first opportunity to really get the general population to come in masses, because typically you just have these people who are victims or under one umbrella, and they have their own demographical biospheres, and so the information doesn't get disseminated because it's a different type of culture. And so we're trying to step outside of that so that we can bring everyone else in and hopefully promote the awakening. So,
well, that would be so awesome. We should spend a few minutes talking about our friend Dr. Robert Duncan.
Yeah. Yes.
So how did you meet him?
So I was met Dr. Duncan or as friends, not face to face ever, back in 2009, 2010 through Dr. John Hall and a gentleman who also passed, who was involved with this phenomenon, Dr. Terry Robertson. I don't know if you are familiar with that name. But Dr. Duncan has always been supportive to the community who was suffering from this phenomenon.
Yeah.
Interesting enough, before he passed, we have recently come up with 2 inventions, and he was aware that I was working on. One of them was to how to record this modulated signal that's being transmitted. And we were successful in that, and he helped me with developing some filters in order to do that appropriately. What also developed out of that is that we also figured out a way how to, at least for those who are suffering and have that high-pitched 10 kilohertz to 11 kilohertz signal that's constantly sent to you, we've developed a very inexpensive but very effective way to block that out, because that's the part that doesn't allow you to get rest or recoup.
Yeah.
We can deal with sounds. We're used to that as humans, but that is very debilitating. And so we have been able to develop a technique, and for under $10, you can go around everyday life and become somewhat more normal, where your cognitive abilities are back to what you're used to, where your body feels rested and so forth. But he was very instrumental in that. And what was interesting is, him and I were having this dialogue, and then he sends out this message. I knew he was going to go travel for a little bit. And then he sends out this message to everyone. This is check, but not mate. And then we hear that he passed away. Yeah.
So do you know if he finished his book?
I do not know. I know he was trying to work on it, but I did not get any indication whether he finished it or not.
Yeah, I talked to him in the spring, and his target date was around May.
Mm-hmm.
But you know how books are. It always takes you longer.
I have one too that I'm working on now that I thought it would be done by now, but we need more editing. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got 2 that I'm working on. And now everything's speeding up. Everything is speeding up. So it's really hard to find the time. But so I guess share with the viewers about your conference, and also where they might be able to get this device if it's on the commercial market.
Oh, it's not on the commercial market. I mean, we literally, after this was very recent. Duncan passed not too long ago. So this has been a very recent development. I'm not going to patent anything. I'm going to be giving this out to the community for free, and I will be disclosing this at the conference.
Okay.
The conference is mynexuslive.com. You can go to our website and see all of the speakers who are going to be there. In addition, you can go to www.mynexustickets.com, and for all of your viewers who are watching, for a 3-day pass event, they can use the code mNexus, and they'll get $50 off. And if you can't attend, that's fine. We'd love to have your support. Our goal is to get at least 10,000 streamers worldwide so we can disseminate the message. And for $99, you get the 3-day event pass plus a year access. But we'll be disclosing information on how to block the signal out. We'll talk about how we discovered you can record the modulated signal. That was through the help of Dr. I'm going blank. I hate it when that happens. Dr. Robert Duncan. So we'd love your support. This is an important topic. It's part of the awakening. I still believe in a higher power, and each and every one has that within us, and all we need to just is work together and make this happen.
Absolutely. So yes. I definitely support what you're doing, and I've got targeted individuals that follow my work, and I reach out as best I can. And it's very hard when you know that your tools are limited to help somebody. Yes. In most instances, if somebody is in financial need or this or that, you can usually help. But with targeted individuals, it's so unique to them. It's very difficult. And so I think we do need to come together, even if this is not something, viewers, that you are out there that you've experienced. There are many people. 60 Minutes did 2 20-minute segments, one on young, healthy people at the White House, and then they did a 20-minute segment on government, children of government workers in Washington, D.C. So check it out. It is a real phenomena. So, and what I learned when I did my coverage on Whack-A-Brain and Soul Catcher was they have given the operational go to hit every man, woman, and child on planet Earth. So it behooves you to get prepared and schooled up in how you're going to handle it if it visits you. So this is Celeste with the Celestial Report. God bless each one of you, and we will see you the next time.